Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's daily devotional for Tuesday, June the 9th. So, there's an article that I'd like to share with you guys, and a little short 20-second video. Now, the video is not going to have any audio, but it's pretty self-explanatory. It's more something you really just watch than anything else. So I want you to watch this with me and see the kind of the situation here. Some of you may have already watched this yourselves at some point or whatnot, but it's really quite cute. So, whoa, hold on a second. There we go. All right. So this is a video of two little boys. One's a black boy, one's a white boy, and they're toddlers. They can barely walk. You'll be able to see it, but it's a viral video, and apparently it's actually not recent, but it has resurfaced, especially given some of the tensions that are going on lately. So notice how. Oh. So these, like I said, there's no audio. It's coming across my computer, so I muted it real quick. But these little boys, apparently, and it's titled something like Two Besties or something like that. But I guess they're best friends, and they're just enjoying each other. And kids they don't notice skin color. I mean, and if they do, it's maybe just in passing, and then they just move on. It's just one of those things. Oh, okay, and then they go on to play with each other. But what's interesting is, and of course, the video here, the title of in case you wanted to watch it yourself and listen to the words or whatnot, parents of hugging toddler besties speak out on resurfaced viral video, more relevant than it was before. This was published a day ago. And this is on Fox News. And so apparently this is in New York City. And like I said, this was a video that is actually fairly old, but it's had 19 million views on Twitter. But I thought it was really interesting and really, really great. So notice the statement here by one of the kids' dads. He said, "I didn't see it at the time, but I see it now. It was a beacon of hope. It shows love and what the future could be like if children are raised in a different way. Again, regardless of what you think about that, it's going to be kind of iconic. I've gotten messages from people all around the world." And so I think it's obviously a cute video. It's the kids, and if you watch it yourself, the little boys are giggling, and that sort of thing. It's cute. Take my word for it. So, but it got me thinking about the occasions where Jesus describes how the kingdom of heaven, in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, one must be like one of those little children. Okay, and there are several times Jesus brings up little children, and it's generally in occasions where little children are being brought to Jesus, and the disciples are like, "Hey, don't bother him right now," or whatever. For whatever reason, they rebuked them, and Jesus says, "Hey, why are you rebuking them?" And whether these are kind of there's several accounts of this, and whether these are all kind of the same couple of accounts in all three of the Gospels, or yeah, because John, there's not it's not recorded in John. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, or if some of these might be slightly different, but they vary between pointing out the innocence of children and the humility of children. So notice here in Matthew chapter 18 and in verse 1. At the time the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and said, "Assuredly I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So here in Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 4, Jesus emphasizes the humility on the basis of the question, who's the greatest? Okay, who's the best disciple? Again, we talked about degrees of sin in our Bible study on Sunday. But in this case, it's kind of who's the degrees of the best? Who's the greatest? And Jesus says, listen, it's not about comparing yourself to one another. It's about humbling yourself and being a servant of each other. And of course, Jesus goes on to say in verse 5, whoever receives one little child like this, and of course, Jesus is speaking not, there's of course the side application of, yes, a little child, but more specifically of a disciple. Whoever receives a disciple in my name receives me. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin. Well, you can't cause a child to sin as if their sin laid to their account because they're innocent. Okay, they don't understand. However, Jesus again is in this parallel of talking about disciples. Whoever causes one of my disciples who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Jesus is likening the little children in verses 5 and 6 to his disciples. Okay, that's what he's referring to. Again, there is the secondary application to literal little children in verse 5 and 6 as well, certainly. But Jesus is primarily talking about that. So then in Matthew chapter 19 and in verse 13, little children were brought to him that he might put his hands on him and pray. But the disciples rebuked them. But Jesus said, let the little children come to me, and do not forbid them, for such is the kingdom of heaven. And he laid his hands on them and departed from there. There's not a lot of context in the situation here, other than there is Jesus, is kind of in the context of Matthew 19 of talking about marriage and divorce and sin. Then he talks about the importance of following, giving up, being willing to give up everything to follow after Christ, the rich young ruler. But again, whether Jesus is emphasizing here the innocence or the humility, I tend to think of, generally speaking, given the lack of context here in Matthew 19 on this occasion, this seems to be a separate occasion, obviously, from Matthew 18, that this is innocence, that these children are pure. Let the children come to me and do not forbid them, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. Okay, they're brought to them so that they may receive a blessing, that Jesus may pray over them. And these are innocent little souls, and Jesus is emphasizing the fact that the kingdom is made up of such. And then, of course, there are parallel verses as well. For instance, in Mark chapter 9 and in verse 37, I'm not going to go through and read all of these, but similar situation in Matthew chapter 18, Matthew chapter 19, we have very similar context, so it would seem to be just a Mark's recording of the same event in Matthew chapter 19. Let the little children come to me, do not forbid them, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. And then in Mark chapter 9 and in verse 34, they were arguing over who was the greatest. And so remember, Jesus asked them, what was it you were arguing about on the road? And they were like, So he called the 12, if anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. And he took a little child, set them in the midst of him, and when he had taken him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one of these little children in my name receives me. Whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. And so he uses a little child here. Whether this is the same event, it sounds similar. It may have been another event. Of course, this is involving the 12 here. And so, whereas the Matthew account in Matthew chapter 18, the 12 aren't specifically mentioned, it was just the disciples. So whether it was the same event or not. But again, it seems to be emphasizing the humility of little children at that point. Then again in Mark chapter 10, The same thing as what we saw before. They brought little children to him that he might touch them, but the disciples rebuked them. Jesus saw it, he was greatly displeased, and said to them, verse 14, "Let the little children come to me, and do not forbid them, for of such is the kingdom of God. Assuredly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will by no means enter it." Now this one's a little bit different. So Mark chapter 10 and in verse 15, in addition to the other passages which emphasize their innocence and emphasize their humility, this one seems to emphasize their willingness to obey. Okay, their willingness to receive what they're told. Not gullibility. Okay, this isn't to be misunderstood as being a characteristic of gullibility, but the fact that when they're taught the truth, they accept it and they believe it. Okay, and for instance, teaching our children about the fact that you treat people of any ethnicity, any skin color the same as you would treat your brother or your sister. Okay, that's an important point to make. And certainly as Jesus makes this case about them being able to receive the kingdom of God, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child, completely trusting. Little children, when their parents, they ask their parents a question and their parents answer them, they believe their parents. They completely trust and put their faith in what their parents say. Again, it doesn't make them gullible. The answer's coming from a place of authority. And the same case is here in Mark chapter 10. And I could go through the rest of these. And basically, they're all kind of, for the most part, the same examples. Again, well, actually, there's only one more. Luke chapter 18, I think. Luke chapter 18 is the only other one. They brought infants to him that he might touch them, but when the disciples saw it, they rebuked them. Jesus called them to him and said, "Let the little children come to me, do not forbid them, for of such is the kingdom of God. Assuredly I say to whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will by no means enter it." So you've got those three main aspects. And again, those first two are kind of the ones I wanted to emphasize about the innocence and the humility. Okay, that those are characteristics that we must have of little children, and that's something you kind of see in that video that we saw. Just innocent two little boys who were, you see kind of just an innate humility in that they don't care about skin color. They just see their best friend, and they had, I think one little boy had a little toy, and they were kind of, the other kid was pointing at it, "Hey, what's that?" And then they were running around and so forth. I mean, that is the innocence and the purity and the humility of little children that we are to have, that Jesus teaches us that we're supposed to have. But then certainly there's that third element application as well, that I hadn't intended actually to bring up in our conversation, which is that we should accept the truth from the gospel, first of all, coming from the authority of God, and put our faith completely in it, but then also make sure to teach our children that. Certainly those are the three total, it would seem, the three total lessons of little children that Jesus teaches in the New Testament regarding these examples that he uses, but I was emphasizing the first two. All right, so that's the daily devotional for you today. I hope that's something that's beneficial. I hope the little video of the little boys kind of brought a smile to your face. Again, if you want to go back and look that up yourself, you can. That's one of those videos that just kind of warms your heart a little bit. But it's a great little video and a great little point. But so hopefully this is something that's helpful for us to remind ourselves that we need to be like those two little boys. Not only when it comes to racial tension, but also when it comes to just innocence and humility. Recognize that we should treat each other not only with respect, but to treat each other innocently, seeing each other as souls and nothing more. All right. Or nothing less, I should say. Nothing less. All right. That'll be the end of our daily devotional today, guys. Tomorrow at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, tomorrow, We'll have our Bible study for Timothy chapter 1. Lord willing, we will finish up that study, and then, or finish up chapter 1, I should say. And then we'll have 3 hymns as well tomorrow evening. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and I hope y'all have a good evening. And Lord willing, I'll see you tomorrow night.